Harry S. Truman was president. I was 2 years old, living in Tuscola, Illinois, population 2,400. This was a view of the business district of my hometown. The entire business district was exactly 1 block long. On January 10th, there was the first meeting of the United Nations, and it was held in London. Also on that day, Project Diana. They bounced radar waves off the moon, measuring the exact distance between the Earth and the moon. And it proves that communication is possible between Earth and outer space, effectively opening the space age. And it's hard to see, but over here, they determined that the moon was 238,000 miles away. On January 17th, the United Nations Security Council holds its first session in London. Now, World War II was over, and so the countries of the world decided they needed an organization to keep the peace, thus the creation of the United Nations. On January 19th, General Douglas MacArthur establishes the International Military Tribunal for the Far East in Tokyo, and this was to try Japanese war criminals. On January 22nd, the National Intelligence Authority and its operational arm, the Central Intelligence Group, are established in the United States. On February 14th, ENIAC, which stands for Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer, that's a mouthful. This was a very early general-purpose electronic computer, and it was built at the University of Pennsylvania, and it came in at 60,000 pounds. Can you imagine? We're a long way from our iPhones and our iPads and our desktop computers, my friends. On February 15th, the Guzinsko affair in Canada announced the shocking discovery of a ring of Canadian communist spies based at the Soviet embassy in Ottawa. They were passing atomic bomb secrets to the Russians. On March 5th, in his speech at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, Winston Churchill talks about the Iron Curtain. This is the very first time the word Iron Curtain was ever mentioned. And Winston Churchill said it in his speech. Now, I lived in St. Louis, Missouri, and I have been to Fulton, Missouri several times in my life. There's a memorial there, and this is what it looks like. Winston Churchill gave his speech in this church behind it. This is an actual piece of the Berlin Wall. They chopped it out of the wall in Berlin and they shipped it to Fulton, Missouri, and they set it up as a memorial and a tribute to Winston Churchill and the fact that he talked about the Iron Curtain in his speech. What is fascinating is they have carved 2 doorways in the shape of a person in this wall, and so you can walk back and forth walking through the Berlin Wall. Pretty cool. On March 8th, the Bell 47 becomes the first helicopter certified for civilian use. Up until then, all helicopters were strictly the use of the military. No civilians could fly helicopters. This was the first one. On April 3rd, Japanese Lieutenant General Masaharu Homa is executed outside Manila in the Philippines for leading the infamous Bataan Death March, which killed 10,000 American and Filipino prisoners. On June 30th, the War Relocation Authority, which has administered the internment of Japanese Americans, is finally abolished. During World War II, Japanese American citizens were put into prisons and concentration camps because they were afraid they would sabotage or help the invasion of Japanese soldiers. And the United States set up these camps all over the United States, mostly over here in California. And they put 120,000 Japanese American citizens in these camps. They just uprooted them. They put them on trains, and the people had to give up their businesses and sell their homes. And of the 120,000, over 90,000 of them were American citizens. And their families dated back to the 1880s. These were loyal American citizens who just unfortunately happened to be of Japanese heritage. And this is a picture of one of the camps. It looks reminiscent of the Nazi concentration camps. These are actual photographs. Here you see the soldiers lining up these Japanese citizens, putting them on trains, and sending them to one of these camps somewhere in the United States. This is one of the darkest, blackest marks against America. And in fact, in around 1986, I believe, President Ronald Reagan officially apologized to the Japanese community. And they paid each person that was sent to one of these camps, they paid them $20,000 to try to make up for the harm that had been done to these good American citizens. It turns out 20,000 Japanese American citizens volunteered to serve in the armed forces. Once again, most historians consider this one of the bleakest, darkest moments in America. And believe it or not, the Supreme Court actually approved this. On July 4th, after more than 48 years of American control, the Philippines attains full independence. And here you see the American flag going down and the Filipino flag going up. Aha! On July 5th, the bikini bathing suit is introduced in Paris. Now, this is what bathing suits look like for American women in 1946. And on July 5th in Paris, this thing came out. This is the actual photograph of the very first bikini being worn by this French lady. Leave it to the French to come up with a bathing suit that looks like this. Ooh la la, Francais. On July 25th at the Club 500 in Atlantic City, New Jersey, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis stage their first show as a comedy team. And during the 40s and 50s and into the 60s, they were a huge success. They made a lot of movies together. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, one of the great comedy acts of all time. On July 25th, In the last mass lynching in the United States, a mob of white men shot and killed two African American couples near Moore's Ford Bridge in Georgia. And these are the two couples that were killed by this mob. On August 3rd, Santa Claus Land opens to the public at Santa Claus, Indiana. It becomes the first theme park, and it preceded Disneyland by 9 years. And this is what it looked like when you drove up to it. It has changed its name and is now called Holiday World. And I live in Indiana, and I've been here several times over the last 25 years. On October 15th, the Nuremberg trials in Germany. Hermann Göring, who was the founder of the Gestapo, and he had recently been convicted of war crimes, he poisons himself 2 hours before he is scheduled to be executed. On the 16th of October, the remaining 10 Nazi war criminals sentenced to death at the Nuremberg trials are executed by hanging in a gymnasium in the Palace of Justice, Nuremberg, Germany. On the 23rd of October, the United Nations General Assembly convenes for the very first time in New York City. On December 7th, the Weinkauf Hotel fire in Atlanta kills 127 people. It is the worst hotel fire in the history of America. On December 11th, UNICEF, the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, is founded. UNICEF, and what great work they have done over the decades. On December 22nd, the Havana Conference took place. Now, this is amazing. This was a meeting of the head of the mafia and the Cosa Nostra crime bosses throughout the United States, and they all went down to Cuba to this hotel, which, by the way, was owned by the mob, the Hotel Nacional de Cuba. And for 2 or 3 days, all of these crime bosses had a big conference. And they got organized, and they decided who was going to control the narcotics, and how are they going to raise money to buy these casinos in Las Vegas. So it was just a great big business meeting of the heads of the mafia families and the Cosa Nostra families across the United States. And there were several dozen big mafia crime bosses attended this conference. On December 31st, U.S. President Truman delivers Proclamation 2714, which officially ends hostilities in World War II. I don't know why it took so long. I mean, the Japanese surrendered and signed the surrender documents on September 2nd, 1945. And here it is, the last day in 1946, that we officially ended hostilities. I guess it just takes a while to get the paperwork. So, who was born in 1946? I know many of you are going to recognize these names. Diane Keaton, well-known actress. Dolly Parton, fabulous country music singer. Liza Minnelli, actress, singer, dancer, does it all. Folk singer Donovan, haven't heard him in a number of years. And by the way, all of these people are still alive. They're all 78 years old, unless I show you otherwise. Now here's an unusual one. Andre the Giant. He was a professional wrestler. I actually saw him one time in Chicago. I was up there for a meeting, and somehow some people got some tickets, and I got to see Andre the Giant. He stood 7'4" and he weighed 520 pounds. I mean, this is a normal police officer. He looks like a little child compared to Andre the Giant. Unfortunately, he did pass away in 1993. But I saw him on TV a lot. I used to love to watch wrestling on television. Cher, born in 1946. Donald Trump. Gilda Radner. Some of you younger people may not know who she was. She was a comedian on Saturday Night Live. Fabulous, funny lady, Gilda Radner. Unfortunately, we lost her in 1989. And she had that wild hair. That was part of her look. President George W. Bush. The actor Sylvester Stallone, still making movies. The singer Linda Ronstadt, one of my favorites over the years. The very fine actor Danny Glover. President Bill Clinton. Freddie Mercury, the lead singer of the fabulous music group Queen. He had an unbelievable range. I mean, this man could go from bass to soprano. Unbelievable voice. And we lost him in 1991. The very fine actor Tommy Lee Jones. I've loved him over the years. The very fine actress Susan Sarandon. The actress Suzanne Summers. We lost her in 2023. Some of you young people may not know who she is or remember. You older folks, we will remember her for the TV show Three's Company. John Ritter, Joyce DeWitt, and Suzanne Summers. The very fine director Steven Spielberg. Some of the great movies. Jimmy Buffett, Margaritaville, Cheeseburgers in Paradise, Changes in Latitudes. We lost him a couple of years ago. I lived in southern Florida for a number of years, and I got to see him and got to hear him. Went down to his bar, his restaurant in Key West. Jimmy Buffett. What were the top 5 grossing movies of 1946? And that means made the most money. So here they are in rank order from number 1 to number 5. What made the most money? Song of the South. Coming in at number 2, Notorious, starring Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman. Also Claude Rains, and directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Now, those are all huge names. I mean, Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman. You don't get any bigger than they were back then. The best years of our lives. Myrna Loy, Frederick March, Dana Andrews, Virginia Mayo, big names. Duel in the Sun, starring Gregory Peck, Jennifer Jones, and Joseph Cotton. Big names back then. The Jolson Story, the biography of Al Jolson, starring Larry Parks. So, what were the Billboard top 5 songs in 1946? And the way they figure this is they take jukebox plays, radio plays, and record sales, and they crunch all those numbers, and then they come out with the top 5 songs. And here they are, starting at number 1, The Ink Spots, The Gypsy, number 1 song in 1946. Number 2, Eddie Howard and his orchestra, To Each His Own. Number 3, Frankie Carl and his orchestra, Oh, What It Seemed to Be. Number 4, also Frankie Carl, Rumors Are Flying, featuring Marjorie Hughes as the singer. And Perry Como, Prisoner of Love. So, who were considered the top singers or musical groups back in 1946? Perry Como came in at number 1. And once again, what they did is they took radio plays and record sales, and they have these formulas that determines who's number 1 and who's number 2. So it's very scientific. It's not just someone's opinion. Perry Como. A very young-looking Frank Sinatra came in at number 2. Number 3, Sammy Kaye and his orchestra. Number 4, Dinah Shore. She eventually had her own television show years later. Number 5, Les Brown and his orchestra. So those were the 5 most popular musical acts in 1946. So what was introduced in 1946? What was new? Almond Joy. Sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't. And this is what the original package looked like, and they only cost 10 cents back then. Benadryl, surprising. This goes all the way back for hay fever. The food processor. Quite frankly, I was surprised to see. I didn't know a food processor was this old. You know, I tend to think of that as something that came out, I don't know, in the 50s or the 60s. But no, it was introduced way back in 1946. Aha, the Magic 8 Ball. For some of you kids have never seen one of these, what you did is you put this in your hand and you turned it over, and there was a little window. And so you would ask a question like this. Let's say, Magic 8 Ball, am I going to be rich? And then you turned it over, and a little answer would float up in the little window, and you could read the answer. Now, there were 25 answers altogether. 10 of the answers were positive, and 10 of the answers were negative, and 5 of the answers were non-committal. You know, maybe yes, maybe no. So you might say, Magic 8 Ball, will I be rich? And it might say yes or no or it all depends or perhaps. The Osterizer. Once again, I didn't know that thing went back into the 1940s. Aha, here's something I use, or my wife and I use almost every day. Tide soap, introduced in 1946. The radar range microwave oven, one of the first microwaves. Clunky looking thing, isn't it? I don't know that I'd want that sitting in my kitchen, but hey, came out in 1946. Tupperware, and it gets its name from Earl Tupper. This is the guy that invented it. And many women, thousands of women have been to Tupperware parties where the sales lady hosts a party and demonstrates how to use all of the Tupperware. The first bank credit card, and this is amusing. John Biggins of the Flatbush National Bank of Brooklyn becomes the first to offer a bank-issued credit card, and they called it Charge It. But it was only valid for merchants within a 2-block radius of his bank. So once you got 2 blocks away, sorry, your credit card wasn't any good. The baby boomer. Almost exactly 9 months after World War II ended, quote, the cry of the baby was heard across the land, as historian Landon Jones later described the trend. More babies were born in 1946 than ever before in American history, 3.4 million, 20% more than in 1945. This was the beginning of the baby boom. And let me show you a chart. First, a picture. This is what hospital nurseries looked like in 1946. Okay, here's the time across the bottom, and it goes from 1910 all the way up to 2024. Here we are from 1920 to 1930, and this is during the Depression. And during the Depression, people could not afford to have children, and so the birth rate started to plummet. And you see it bottomed out right here around 1930. And then it slowly started to go back up. This is births per 1,000 people. And here we are in 1946. So what happened is people had stopped having babies during the Depression. During the war, the Depression was over, so once the war was ended, these people during the Depression that had put off having children started having children. And millions of soldiers were coming home and getting married and moving into the suburbs and having babies. So it was the Depression era people finally having children, added to the fact that the soldiers and their wives were having children. We had the baby boom, which peaked in 1946. I was born right here. I was born in 1944. I'm 81. What were the 5 most popular radio shows in 1946? I'm not going to talk about television because there were so few TVs it didn't matter. But everybody listened to the radio. So here they are. Fibber McGee and Molly. This show was popular for years and years and years. Next, the Bob Hope Show. He started on radio before he ever went into movies and television. The Lux Radio Theater was the third most popular radio show in 1946. Charlie McCarthy. This always amazed me. The man is a ventriloquist. This is his dummy. Okay. A ventriloquist on radio. I mean, you can't see him. You can't tell that his lips aren't moving. I just found it amusing. But his material was so good that it didn't matter. He was on radio. And a very young looking Red Skelton. He would have been about 32, 33 years old in 1946. So here again, started out on radio, went into movies, and I loved him on television for years and years. The average annual salary in 1946 was $3,000. Now, let me convert that into today's dollars. That would be $50,560 in today's dollars. That's still about $20,000 less than the actual average salary in America today. Today, it's somewhere in the $70,000 range. Okay? A new car, this is a Ford, cost around $1,125 on average. What would that be in today's dollars? That's an $18,960 car. That's still a really cheap car. A gallon of gas cost 21 cents. Let's convert that to today's dollars. That's a little high right now. That's $3.54. I pay less than that at Costco. A new house costs $5,150 for a modest little home. In today's dollars, that would be $86,800. That's still a cheap house. This was a surprise. A dozen eggs cost 59 cents in 1946. Converting that into today's dollars, that is a whopping $9.94 for a dozen eggs. I paid $3.94 at Walmart yesterday. So boy, were eggs expensive. A movie ticket costs 65 cents. What's that in today's dollars? That's a $10.96. Yeah. A year's tuition at Harvard University was $420. Converting that into today's dollars, that would be $7,780. You know what the tuition at Harvard really is? Somewhere between $18,000 and $22,000 a year. So that college was a real bargain back in 1946 compared to today. Monthly rent for an apartment was a whopping $35 in our dollars. That's $590 in today's dollars. So, thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something you didn't know, or at the very least, I've entertained you for a few moments. Be well.